This line here is spoken by Edward Thatch, better known as Blackbeard, near the end of his life in Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. It occurs after a brutal naval engagement with the British Navy, during which Thatch is mortally wounded, and as Kenway approaches, Thatch delivers this reflective and haunting line. So by this point in the narrative, Kenway is caught between his own greed driven ambitions and the Brotherhood's ideals. And Blackbeard, once the most feared pirate in the seas, is cut down not by a glorious duel, but in a hail of musket fire and cannon smoke. And also, the golden age of piracy is visibly collapsing under the combined force of imperial powers. So, this line here, in a world without gold, we might have been heroes. This is Thatcher's final acknowledgement of what might have been if men like him and Kenway had lived in a different world. So, at face value, the line can be broken down into two parts. So, the line that's said, in a world without gold. Now, this line here, see, gold here symbolizes wealth, materialism, and the pursuit of power. So for pirates, gold was both literal, which is treasure, plunder, and wealth, and it was symbolic. And that symbolism, it was freedom purchased at the cost of lawlessness. So that's basically what he's saying is that greed corrupted them. Their pursuit of gold defined their lives and condemned them in the eyes of history. And then the part where he says we might have been heroes. Now, without that corruption, their natural courage, their charisma, leadership, and rejection of tyranny, it might have been directed toward noble ends. See, the pirates, they fought against empire, corruption, and oppression in their own way, but their violence and their greed overshadowed any heroic potential. So Thatch he imagines an alternate world where he and Kenway could actually be remembered as liberators or defenders of freedom rather than criminals. And this line also is steeped in philosophy, raising questions about morality, historical legacy, and human nature. So the part we have here is greed versus virtue. Now, gold equals desire, ambition, and greed. Heroes equal those who act for others, for ideals, or for justice. So that is suggesting that greed perverted what could have been heroic resistance. So in Aristotelian terms, the pirates they had aret, which is excellence, courage, and leadership, but they lacked virtue in directing those qualities toward the good. And then we have historical determinism, which is history is often written by the victors, and the victors being empires and governments. And the pirates, they were remembered as villains. But in a world where wealth was not the central motivator, their defiance might be framed differently. And this touches on a counterfactual philosophy of history. What if context shaped different legacies? And also, continuing this, we do have freedom versus exploitation. See, the pirates, they sought freedom from monarchy and empire. However, though, their freedom often came at the expense of others, such as raiding, killing, and looting. Thatch recognizes the contradiction that their cause aligned with liberty, but their methods align with greed. And then there's the tragic heroism. See, pirates, they fit the mold of the tragic hero, possessing greatness, but undone by a fatal flaw, which is hubris, greed, or recklessness. And Blackbeard, he sees their fate as sealed, not by a lack of courage, but by the lure of gold. So the quote itself is not only philosophical, but it's deeply personal because it stacks his reflection on himself and his reflection on Kenway. Now, when it comes to himself, he reinvented himself as Blackbeard, a terrifying persona. Yet, he was a man who actually craved freedom, who despised living under a crown. And his last words admit that his life could have been more than fear and gold. And his reflection on Edward Kenway, so Kenway, he's still in the middle of his arc at this point, torn between being a selfish opportunist and becoming something greater. In fact, she's actually warning him that chasing gold will consume you, but you could be a hero if you choose differently. It's almost a passing of the torch, challenging Kenway to avoid repeating the same mistakes. So Ubisoft, they deliberately tied this line to real world history because Blackbeard, also known as the real Edward Teach or Thatch, as he's known in the game, was indeed killed in 1718 at Ocracoke Inlet, overwhelmed by British forces. So in history, he's remembered as a fearsome pirate, not a freedom fighter. And the quote, captures the ambiguity of piracy, where were they criminals or were they rebels against oppressive empires? Now, in another world, had piracy been framed as resistance, Blackbeard and his peers might have been seen as revolutionaries. And this foreshadows later historical movements. Revolutionaries in the American or French revolutions are celebrated as heroes, even though they also use violence themselves. So pirates, they were denied that heroic framing. And the line, it also serves as a thematic pivot for Assassin's Creed Black Flag because it signals the death of the golden age of piracy. It forces Edward Kenway and even the player to reckon with the consequences of a life driven purely by wealth. And it emphasizes the Assassin's Creed theme: freedom versus control, greed versus principle. So after Thatcher's death, Kenway is increasingly drawn into the assassin's cause, not because he abandons freedom, but because he begins to realize that freedom without morality is empty. And then we also break it down more in this way. So gold. Gold is greed, it's corruption, empire, the false idol, heroes, they're representing nobility, legacy, and remembered virtue. And then you have the pirate's fate. And that pirate's fate is trapped between the two: courageous, but condemned by greed. And then we have Kenway's journey, deciding whether to remain in pursuit of gold or evolve toward heroism. So this moment hits players deeply because it humanizes Blackbeard, stripping away the myth and showing the man's regret, and also foreshadows Kenway's eventual transformation into someone who wants to leave behind more than wealth. So really it encapsulates the tragic beauty of the pirate dream: bold, free, but doomed. So Blackbeard's dying words: in a world without gold, we might have been heroes. It stands as a eulogy for the pirate age and a warning to the character of Edward Kenway. Now it is at once a lament for what was lost, a critique of greed's corrosive power, and a philosophical meditation on how history judges men. So Thatch recognizes that pirates had the courage, defiance, and the charisma of heroes, but in a world that is ruled by wealth and empire, their pursuit of gold ensured that they would only ever be remembered as villains.